On the bottom of Lamed, we are on the bottom of 33A1, Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, Mar Berei de Rabbana Amar. So if you're in the art scroll, we're in the last paragraph, it's the last line really, 33A1. So if you recall, we had a back and forth regarding a brisa. The brisa said, back and forth within a brisa. The brisa wanted to learn, the brisa was wondering why we need to have an explicit pasuk to tell you that when you commit me'ilah, on purpose, then you don't bring a karban, right? The pasuk says only if you did me'ilah b'shogig, only if you did it by mistake, then you bring a karban. The Gemara said, the brisa asked, why do we need a pasuk? Why do we need a pasuk? I should be able to learn from other isurim, from other prohibitions, let's say like blood, or even like mechil Shabbos, as we'll see, other prohibitions where if I do it by mistake, I bring a karban. If I do it on purpose, right? If I mechal Shabbos by mistake, I bring a karban. If I do it on purpose, I don't bring a karban. Why can't I learn me'ilah from all of them? And the Gemara said, right, should make a kal v'chomer that by other punishments, which are more machmir, because for example, they have kares, whereas me'ilah does not have kares. There, if I do it on purpose, I don't bring a karban. So for sure, for me'ilah, which is more lenient, and then the Gemara gave a response, which almost seems to go like do a 3-6. It seems to like flip its logic and said, no, me'ilah is more stringent, but it wasn't clear in what way me'ilah was more stringent. So we're going to see another interpretation about what the brisa was responding to point out that me'ilah was more stringent. So Mar Berei de Rabbana Amar Hachi Kamar. This is what the brisa was countering to say that me'ilah is more stringent than the others. Lo im amar b'shar mitzvos shelo asa behen she'ein miskavin k'miskavin. By other mitzvos, we do not say that unintentional is the same as intentional. What does that mean? 33A2. Shemiskavin lachto ches talush v'chatach as mechubar shepater. Let's say on Shabbos a person goes ahead and they want to cut something which is already cut. So, for example, you have a bunch of grass, let's say, and you want to cut the grass for whatever reason. Okay, you want to cut it up. The grass is you think the grass is all detached. It's long on the ground, and you remember before Shabbos I cut it all down. It's all detached, and I just want to cut it. The problem is that instead, by mistake, I go ahead while I'm cutting and I cut something which is still attached. One of the blades of grass was still attached. That is an isser. That's talush, right? That's an isser, daraisa, right? But my intention was to cut the things which were detached. So there, what's the halacha? The halacha is that I'm exempt. I'm exempt from a chatas offering because I thought I was cutting detached grass, right? So tomar b'me'ilah. Will you say the same thing case of me'ilah, where what? When it comes to me'ilah, then if I think I'm wearing shearings of chulin. Let's say I have wool that is from regular animals, right? And I think that's what I'm putting on, and it turns out that I'm actually putting on shearings of animal wool that was dedicated to the Beis Hamikdash. So it's, again, same principle. And there when it comes to me'ilah, I'm actually going to be chayav, right? So therefore, pointing out, me'ilah is actually more chamor, more stringent, and therefore I can't learn from other isurim, right? That's what the Gemara was responding. Okay, that's one way of interpreting the response of the brisa. And then we have another interpretation of Nachman Yitzchak Amar, another way of interpreting what the brisa was saying. Again, let's just review very quickly. The brisa began by saying we should learn, why do we need a pasuk to tell you that by me'ilah I'm pater for doing a pater from a karban, I'm exempt from a karban if I do it on purpose. I should learn from other isurim which are more chamor, more stringent, and we're saying no, me'ilah is actually more stringent. So we just gave one example, and we're going to give another possible read to point out how me'ilah is more stringent. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Amar Hachi Amar. This is what the brisa was saying. Okay, by other mitzvos, a person is not liable while not preoccupied, just like they are while they are preoccupied. What that means is follows: similar to the other case, but a little bit different. The case is as follows: a person intends to pick up something detached, but instead cuts something attached. So the first case was, I knew I was cutting, I just thought I was cutting things which were separated. It turns out I was cutting something which was attached. Here, I don't even think I'm cutting. I'm planning on just picking stuff up from the ground. The problem is that some of those things I didn't realize are actually attached. So I thought I was just picking up, which is just one action. Turns out I was doing a totally different action. I was actually detaching because there were things there which were attached. So that by Shabbos, if I were to go ahead and do so, let's say again, before Shabbos I go ahead and I cut down all my wheat, I cut down all my grass, and I have a pile. And on Shabbos I want to pick it up to give to my animal, right? And I pick it up with my hands, and it turns out that I pulled out some grass. Totally exempt. However, Tomer b'me'ilah, but you're going to say the same thing by me'ilah. Me'ilah is more chamor, more stringent. Why? Shem hoshid yado lechli litol chayfetz. If a person is putting their hands, a similar case would be, a person puts their hand into a utensil, like a drawer or a bucket, whatever it is, and they put their hand in to get something which they thought was in there. And what happens? V'sach yado b'shemen shel kodesh, and inside that barrel is actually some oil that belongs to the Beis Hamikdash. Shemal. I'm going to be over on me'ilah. So again, it's the same thing. I'm intending to do one type of action, and I end up doing a totally different thing. Yeah?
I guess I just feel like the cutting one is almost like negligent. Like if you're actually cutting on a grass. I don't know. That feels more different level of.
Okay, maybe my example is not fine.
I mean, like it's a little.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe you're talking about, again. Maybe you're talking about a case where it's not as negligent. You're right. If it comes to a case where it's like so close to you should have known, then maybe the halach will be different. My example may not be perfect. Mm-hmm. Okay. But the point is that even in a scenario where like you shouldn't, there's no reason to assume that it was like this, but nonetheless happens to be. Meaning there happens to be some one long thread, grass that was just attached. Like, why in the world do you think this is one long grass? Right. So yeah, okay. So fine. So again, by Me'ila, we're saying Me'ila is more chamer. Why? Because when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, if I had a whole bunch of detached grass and then I'm picking it up, or detached wheat, I'm picking it up, and it turns out one of them was attached, and I pull it out, putter. When it comes to Me'ila, if I put even though I was doing one action, I was doing an action of picking up, and it turns out I end up doing an act of cutting, totally exempt. If there was a barrel, and in that barrel there is a safer, and I plan on getting my Derech Hashem out of that barrel, and it turns out there's also some oil, or there was oil of hektish in there, and I end up anointing my hands, I'm actually going to be chayav. So you see, Me'ila is more chamor than these other isurim, and therefore it goes back to why the Torah needs to say, B'shogeg prat lemezid. We can't learn from other isurim, we can't learn from other prohibitions, because Me'ila is actually more chamor than other isurim. And that's why the Torah had to go out of its way to tell you that shogeg, you bring a karban, mezid, you do not. Okay, now we come back to some of the laws of Pesach. If there was one statement that was made in regards to Hilchos Pesach and Truma, that when it comes to the Brisa said that chametz cannot acquire the kedusha of truma on Pesach, and we're going to define that a little bit more. If you recall, we had a statement earlier that said that if a person is going to give truma, which is chametz, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So what are the parameters? What's the source of that? What are the parameters of that? That's what we're going to discuss over here. Okay, Amar Mar, B'medvar Mur. In what case? In what case is it possible that truma is able to be chametz? Okay, in other words, what's a scenario you could even have truma that's chametz, right? Whereas we're going to see there is going to be a scenario where chametz cannot even become truma. So the Gemara first is asking, what's a case that truma actually could become chametz? So says the Gemara, b'mafresh truma v'chmitza. Let's say a person separates truma from produce, okay, and then it became chametz. So for example, right, is wheat chametz? No, wheat isn't chametz. It's wheat that hits water that becomes chametz, right? So let's say on Pesach, a person goes ahead, on Cholamite, a person goes and they cut down some wheat, and then it becomes chametz. Okay, that's a case. So scenario would be I give truma. I separated this truma, and then water falls in it and becomes chametz. That would be a case of truma that becomes chametz. Aval hifrish chametz truma. But let's say a person goes ahead and they separate produce that was already chametz to become truma. Let's say a person harvested their wheat, and then water fell in it, it became chametz, and they want to go ahead and now in Pesach and give it to the Kohen. Doesn't work. Give it a call, Eina Kedosha, it does not become consecrated. You cannot give chametz on Pesach to the Kohen. It doesn't work.
Because it has no value, right?
Let's see, the Gemara is going to say, Minani Mili, ask the Gemara, Max's question, where do we learn this from? Yitzchak, Amar Kra, Titen, Lo. You have to give it to him. Okay, what does it mean to him? Vilila Oro, and not to his fire. Because if I give a Kohen chametz, then he can't do anything. What do you do if you find chametz on Pesach? You burn it. You burn it. So therefore, it's not called giving it to him. If I have chametz on Pesach and I try giving it to the Kohen, it's not for him, it's for burning. It doesn't have any value. And therefore, not because it doesn't have value, that's not the focus. The focus is because it's not to him, instead it has to be burnt, and therefore it's not going to work. Ask the Gemara, is that true? Maser Rav Huna, Bereder Rav Yeshua. We have a halacha that you can't, let's say you have a whole bunch of produce and you want to give truma to the Kohen. So a person goes ahead and says, okay, so part of my produce became tameh. I'm going to give the tameh produce. Let's say again, I have a whole thing of wheat, and then part of the wheat comes into contact with a sheret, comes into contact with the rodent. So it's tameh. And I say, okay, I want to give the tameh produce to the Kohen as truma. The Gemara says you can't do so. But if I did it by mistake, if I took the true, let's say I didn't realize it was tameh, right? I didn't realize if some of it came into contact with the rodents. Okay, I give it to the Kohen, and then later on, someone was at home and says, "Oh, did you know that produce came into contact with the rodents? It's tameh." If I did it by mistake, truma so truma, it works. Ask the Gemara, "V'amai? Why would it work?" Lema lo v'lo oro. The pasuk you just quoted a pasuk that says lo. You have to give it to the Kohen v'lo oro. It has to be something that could be eaten, and it can't be something which has to be burnt. Truma tameya, tameh truma gets burnt. So how could it work? If it granted it's shogeg, granted it was a mistake, how could it work? The Gemara says no. Lo kasha, there's no problem because hasam haisa lo shasa kosher. Regarding truma that's tameh, the reason it works is because the produce was at least fit at some point in time. Hacha lo haisa lo shasa kosher. When it comes to truma that is chametz, it was never fit. That's what the pasuk is coming to exclude. When it says lo velo laora is to go for the kohen and not for his fire, it's actually a very particular case. We're going to see what that case is in a moment, at least according to this opinion. And that is that if it was something that at some point in history the kohen could have benefited from it, no problem. Then it works. Even if right now when I give it to the kohen, it's tameh, right? I shouldn't do it because ultimately I'm stealing from that meaning. I shouldn't do it deliberately, right? If I have produce that I know is tameh, if I give it to the kohen, I'm a jerk because I'm stealing from him because he can't benefit from it. But if I do it by mistake, it works. It works. Why does it work? Because at the end of the day, at some point, it was produce that the kohen could have had. Granted, by the time I gave it to him, it was tameh, but it works. Okay? What does the pasuk mean? Lo v'lo oro is talking about something which never was fit for the kohen. Okay, so now we're going to have to, by chametz, chametz, at some point it was fit for the kohen, it's only right, so the Gemara says, so what's the case that the produce, when it comes to chametz, never had a moment of fitness? A very unique case, where it became chametz while it was still attached. Now, bottom line is, what?
You can't even harvest it at that point then, right?
You're saying halachically because it's, okay, fine, but again, it was done by mistake, right? But the point is that technically, so truma only begins when I harvest. Truma doesn't begin, the whole obligation for truma. Let's say I never harvest my field. I don't owe any truma. It's only after I harvest that the obligation begins. We're talking about a case where the produce, after it fully matures, apparently, I don't know anything about wheat, but apparently after it fully matures, and it's no longer gaining nutrients from the ground, if it rains on it, it's possible for produce to actually become chametz at that point. Okay, it's an extremely rare scenario, but it could start becoming leavened at that point, and that's the case we're talking about. But he says, 33a4. He says, you're right. If the produce became chametz when it was detached, then you're right. The pasuk of lo, v'lo la'ora would not apply, and you would be able to give that to a kohen. If your person gives that to a kohen, it would work. Says Rav Nachman Yitzchak Amar Lei in he says, he asked us a question. He says, that's the case you're talking about? It's such a limited case. It's such a bizarre, meaning you're telling me the brisa which said, lo v'lo la'oro is talking about this very unique, bizarre case where it became chametz while it's attached. Is that so? And Amar Lei, Nachman says, yes, in. Big zeres irin piskama umaymer kadishin sha'alta. I don't know where those words are from. Sound like they're from the Zohar. They're not. They're from Daniel, the book of Daniel. I can't believe you don't all know Daniel by heart. What's it called? Okay, so time to learn Dach Yomi. Neither do I. Don't worry. What's it called? But the point is that this is what this means is that the matter has been decided in my favor by decree of the angels, and the ruling is I've said by the words of the holy ones. And so do the rabbis in the academy rule according to me. Okay, so according to Daniel, basically say the angels. By the angels, he means the scholars. They all agree with me. This is indeed the case. Lo v'lo la'ora is talking about this very unique particular case. Okay, however, not everyone agrees. Ki asa Rav Huna braid Rav Yeshua. When Rav Huna, the son of Yeshua, came, he said a different source, which is going to broaden the limitation of chametz significantly. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Rashis. The pasuk says, Rashis, what's the whole pasuk? The pasuk says, Rashis digancha tirosh v'tzarecha v'rashis goes sancha titen lo. That we have an obligation to give the firsts to the Kohen. Truma is the first. But if I say the first, by definition, what if there is a first? There is obviously a second, right? Whenever there's a first, there's a second. So Amar Kra Rashis, Sheshiareha Nikarn L'Yisrael. There has to be something which is left over, which is going to be fit for the Jew. It literally means distinguishable for the Jew, for the regular Yisrael. Yatzazo she'en shiar nikarin, as opposed to chametz, where what's remainder, the second, is not fit for everyone else, right? Following, in other words, what he says, no, the source of lo v'lo la'oro is not a good source because that, you're right, is going to be limited to this very, very particular case. He says when the Brisa told us earlier that chametz cannot be given it for truma, we weren't just talking about this very particular case of chametz that's growing, it becomes chametz while it's still attached. No. There is a more basic pasuk which says that you have to give the first to Jesse, and what that means is whatever is left over, the sheni, the second, is something that's fit for me. But if I'm giving you chametz, then the sheni is not fit for me because it's chametz, and therefore, rather this pasuk Reish is coming to exclude all cases of chametz. Anytime it's chametz, anytime the truma is chametz, it will not work. Whether it became chametz attached to the ground, whether it became chametz detached from the ground, in a scenario where what I'm going to give you, what's remaining is not going to be fit, i.e. it's chametz, it does not work as truma, and that is the source that you can't give truma from something that is chametz. Yes?
So if you have one thing of I don't know, whatever, one thing of wheat.
There's no truma. Truma has to be a separation.
Right. So if there's just one that becomes chametz, but there isn't a second one that becomes chametz, then there's not left over that would be okay? Or we're talking
I'm not sure. So it could be that, good question. It could be that we're saying that, right? So Max is saying, what about if I give the one stalk that becomes chametz, then everything else is fit? No, the point is that it has to be something that of that thing would be fit, and since that thing you're giving is not fit, it would be a limitation. It would say that you can't even give that to one stock, even if everything that remains is not chametz. Okay, we'll pick up tomorrow. Have a great day.